Ready? Okay, good. Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure having you here this afternoon. We are going to have a panel on one very important issue in the context of the next decade for higher education, which is financing higher education. You may have seen that the conference is organized around 10 different themes, and one of the most important, I would say, is probably this one on financing. I'm here in this panel joined by three different profiles of people who have many things to say about financing higher education. Next to me, I would like to start by introducing the Vice Minister of Higher Education of Chile, actually Undersecretary, I think that's the official name. She is a professor, an academic, and a politician of Mapuche origin. For those of you who are not aware of that, the Mapuche is one of the indigenous people living in Chile. She has long experience as a researcher in the areas of public management, in context of diversity, and particularly looking at the needs of indigenous peoples. She spent a lot of time, I would say, studying and working as well in this city, so she knows quite well our environment. Of course, maybe it would be interesting to see, to know that she was director of the School of Government and Public Management at the University of Chile, where she is still one of the leading academics. Importantly, at least seen from the perspective of UNESCO, she was the first woman and person of Mapuche origin to serve as vice president of the university's Senate at the University of Chile. So thank you very much for joining us. Second, I'm just following the order. We have Professor Dante Tefera. He is a very well-known and professor of higher education at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Dr. Tefera is leader of higher education training and development at his own university in Durban, South Africa. He is the founder and director of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa, and was earlier at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College in the United States. Professor Tefera is also the former founding editor-in-chief of the International Journal of African Higher Education and the Chronicle of African Higher Education. So we have a very knowledgeable voice about African higher education in this panel. And last but not least, let me introduce to you Roberta Malie Basset, Global Lead for Tertiary Education and Senior Education Specialist at the World Bank. Dr. Basset is Global Lead for Tertiary Education and providing leadership and technical expertise for projects related to post-secondary education reform initiatives around the world. By the way, I was in a couple of panels this morning, and in both we had at least 2, if not 3 panelists mentioning the support they were receiving from the World Bank. And expressing their satisfaction, you never know, right?
Just exactly right.
So it's also very, very positive. Okay, she has been team lead for various initiatives in higher education in topics such as finance and quality assurance reform, the internationalization of higher education, equity, access, research and competitiveness, and of course, skills development. She currently serves on the editorial board of Higher Education Quarterly and the International Advisory Board of the International Network for Higher Education in Africa. The way we are going to proceed for this panel, and I guess that most of you, if not all, have already seen how this works, but just in case, we are going to have just a couple of rounds of questions with the panelists, one after the other, and then we will engage in an open dialogue with you, Okay, so be ready to share with us your thoughts, your comments, and ask questions to the panelists as well. Okay, so let me start first inviting Professor, sorry, and I forgot to say that you can use English, French, or Spanish following your wishes. Now, let me start with Subsecretary Figueroa Huancho, and I'm going to switch now to Spanish. That way you can benefit from the change.
Subsecretary Figueroa, I'd like to start by asking you, well, we know that even though you're not new in politics, the new Chilean administration has been in office for a very short period, and there are many question marks as to what the government will do in terms of funding higher education. So before looking at the solutions, that'll be in a second round. The first question will be from your viewpoint. What are the most important challenges facing financing or funding of higher education in your context? Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. I shall speak in Spanish, which is the official language of my country, in Castilian Spanish, but I also like to welcome all of you in my language, in Mapuche. Thank you very much for the invitation, I say, to converse on this important subject. And this is a wonderful space opened by UNESCO to visualize most of our thoughts, our approaches, and also look at Chile and how new voices, new reflections, new thoughts are emerging to deal with subjects which from the Western perspective haven't often been heard, and we shall talk about subjects from perhaps a different perspective. Chile, as you well know, was the scenario, a paradigmatic scenario, to implement a neoliberal model, which was strengthened during the dictatorship, and when the dictatorship came to an end, it hasn't really been questioned or modified in depth. And this neoliberal model, which has led to great inequality in our country, which were borne out by the social explosion in 2018, and there was a feminist movement, Feminist May, which looked at the structural inequalities in our societies, and the state, by the way, has replicated. That has also been useful to ensure that as a society we have to rethink. We are planning a new constitution, where we're going to, again, take a long, hard look at the role of the state, a state which has been subsidiary in many aspects, such as education or health, has been subsidiary in the market. The market has ruled and devised how they will run, how education run, how public health is run, and include governing access to it. So the feminist movement has attempted to question this model, and all this wide-ranging questioning has, of course, also led to question in education. Our president, Gabriel Boric, comes from the grassroots, from the social movement, and stated we need to rethink funding of the higher education sector. So my challenge is to push forward a project for a government which is officially feminist, and that is a conceptual framework, a theoretical framework, which allows these reflections to talk about. Funding is not something which you do from a neutral vantage point. We have to, if you like, take sides. Instead, we have to have a new a new look, and also looking at intersections covering gender, ethnic perspectives, and with the crossroads, other approaches emerge. So we as a government feel that it is very important to push forward a project for change, and have a market for higher. We don't want to talk about a market for higher education, but a higher education system. If we look at Chile, well, Chile has been recognized at the national level as a paradigm. And expansion organization of our system via the market. The market ruled, and our educational higher education system. Well, families choose their institution based on their if you like, purchasing power. There is public education, but if you like, there are means tests, if you like, and there are a series of vouchers which are granted to the citizens, and because the system has been privatized over the years, and there is an important competition between higher education institutions to actually capture students. Many of the institutions have their funding via this voucher system by the state, and there has been an educational system which is private. The only 17% of fee paying are from public universities. All the rest are private. Some of them represent economic groups who have elitist perspective, and there are others which are funded by churches or religious groups, and their ideology means that they will select those who are admitted based on their views. So for us, in this idea that there is a competitive struggle between in the higher education market, there's a key element which you must bear in mind with a view to modifying it. And I refer to the following. We have started a debate, a discussion on how can we transform education, which is based on a subsidiary model, where there was very little intervention by the state. But how can we move forward to a funding system which, above all, implies that our funding alternatives will define those who will have access to higher education. And this funding system, the current system, is based on a voucher system, and that does not take a due account of the trajectory and those who are deserve access to higher education. So often we will be leaving outside groups such as women groups who are left behind, and that will have a knock-on effect on their access to the labor market. They will not be able to reach the jobs with competitive salaries and so on. So we have a complex, if you like, legal framework. Access to the higher education has increased a lot in recent years, but basically there's still a lot of inequity and inequality. Only those who can pay most are the ones who access universities. So there is a paradoxical situation in Chile. In Chile, the contribution of the state has increased in recent decades. The funding that the state provides to the higher education sector via vouchers, which guarantee a certain level of funding and of gratuity for students. Students can elect which university they go to, either via a system which is known like a credit backed by the state. The state via the banking system. Well, the banks will provide loans to students, like soft loans, and they're guaranteed by the state. But at the same time, given the levels of inequality in our country, the capacity to return these loans will vary a lot between students. And at the end of the day, the state has to pay back these loans. We have paid back vast amounts just on interest payments because often students cannot pay back these loans, and the state acts as ultimate guarantee. And if we look at what Chile invests in higher education, our calculations bear out that it's every 3 Chilean pesos that the state invests in higher education, only 1 of those pesos actually goes to the state education system. So the funding does not meet our standards and our aspirations. The education should be key to social mobility. But currently in this government, we are rethinking the funding system. We're taking a long, hard look at it. One of the measures in the pipeline is to control all the student debt, which is a huge burden for student families, via these loans, which have the state as ultimate backing, and looking at a new educational system following equity and social justice criteria. Above all, bearing in mind intersectional and gender perspectives. We need to move forward to a model which is not exclusive, a model which turns universities into democratic spaces where different bodies, languages, proposals, ideas can have pride of place and can interplay, because that is where citizenship will be constructed. We will be training and educating our future leaders, and that is not going to solve our problems of inequality if we follow the current system, and which would grow in the next decades. Thank you very much. Let me highlight some elements from your presentation. First and foremost, the analysis you have made, attempting to answer your question, of looking at the challenges you are facing. It is an analysis which is not so much financial, but you're looking at matters from a strictly political vantage point. What I've understood is that what you want to do is to assess the funding systems based on values, and you have talked of equality and also the gender perspective, feminism. It is very clear that you are facing a paradox, and you're referring to the education market in Chile, which you would like to change and turn into a different system. But there's a paradox that most of the funding continues, if you like, benefiting the private sector, which is a majority one in your country in terms of higher education. And your government, your new administration will try to find a new equilibrium, a new balance. And I think hopefully I've understood well. Thank you very much.
Professor Tefera, I think that first of all, I would like to express our gratitude for the effort you made to provide this conference with a reflection paper on the issues around financing higher education, particularly in developing contexts. I think that this input was really wonderful, and I would like to invite participants here just to download this working paper or background paper, which is along with the other 9 available to all participants. Now, Professor Tefera, you can bring, of course, you have a global perspective, but I like very much, if you can, to share with us how you see the challenges of financing higher education, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. You know, because this is probably home, for good or bad, of some of the countries that are really trying, you know, to strive in a context where financial capacities are really limited. And I'd like very much to see with you what do you think the challenges are. I think I have to say that we couldn't agree more with you on the fact that financing higher education, funding higher education in a way, is crucial to other areas like quality, equity, access, and so on. So please, share with us your wisdom.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, the audience, and thank you for the opportunity inviting me to prepare the background document. Well, when that conversation started earlier, I was thinking the world issue now are constraining me to speak within the sub-Saharan continent, but
do as you please.
I will do that. Thank you. But just before talking about money, I think for that matter, all the conversations we've had for the last several days and today, you can dream whatever you want. At the end of the day, what matters is money to actually be able to achieve what we are all saying we would at the end. But before actually talking about money matters, I just want to give a preamble in terms of population growth. In 2025, the world anticipates to hit 10 billion, to have exact number 98, 9.8, whatever. So of that, 70% of the students who are coming into higher education come from non-OECD G20 countries. That tells you that the massive growth that's going to happen at the global level actually happens it's very difficult. Is it now south? In the past, it used to be called east-west. Now it's called north-south. So just to give you that perspective, 70% of those students would be coming from non-OECD countries. That gives you the kind of pressure that's going to grow within those regions. That's key and very important. And to give a perspective, Brazil is if there is any Brazilian here, they can fact check me. 2.7 million students in 2000, but now they have trebled. It's over 8 million. That is Brazil. To come back to the sub-Saharan context, Ethiopia is an excellent example. A decade or so ago, it had only 50,000 students. It has now 1 million students. It's a 2,000% growth, which we are looking at. So I'm trying to superimpose these figures on the issues of challenges. So in terms of challenges, you can actually see the massive growth that happened in these countries, to the extent that the public funding could not accommodate this anymore. In fact, I had a conversation with the Ethiopian authorities, which they actually had massive growth from 2-3 universities, now 50 universities. They said, we are not going to open new public universities anymore. We have to make sure that the ones we have established are now properly funded, and we now cater to and advance quality issues. And not only quality issues, we bring in issues of equity and excellence and all that. So these are the important issues I just want to raise. Mm-hmm. In terms of the challenges, now that I laid out the kind of massive, in fact, exponential growth in some countries, increasingly, or thanks to COVID, the kind of resources governments generate by way of taxes and revenue has declined, and also the current conflict in the other parts of the world doesn't seem to help. That means increasingly there will be a lot of pressure on governments, even to, from whatever resources they have had in the past, that's going to, and anticipated to decline. That continues to be a challenge for that development. And the other one, which is very also important, we also find that there's a tension between higher education and primary and secondary education. Now that we have somehow reached that, I'm putting it in quote, no child left behind. So we have a massive primary education now that has grown into primary education now. There's a huge constituency within the primary and secondary education that requires a lot of resources from governments. That becomes an issue, and that continues is a challenge and continues to be a challenge as well. And there is, I would like to acknowledge my professor, Professor Philip Altba, he calls it the publicization, the privatization of public institutions. In much of the universities, in what is called the public institutions, there's lots of fees have been now instituted, from computer access fee to library fee, et cetera, a registration fee, et cetera. So increasingly some of these institutions called public institutions are not really public per se anymore, because largely the students continue to pay. In the case of China, for example, yes, 80% of Chinese students to go to public institutions, but actually virtually all of them actually contribute some kind of fees towards their education. So I think one of the challenges which we also have, I think I listened to your excellent presentation, thank you, and Chile is an excellent example in terms of how it is trying to push a certain agenda in terms of pushing against the grain, as it were, that increasingly the world is pushing into, the term here is cost sharing, from public to private. And that is an emerging development, but some countries are pushing back. But that is a political decision as well. But I think one has to also be realistic in terms of the massive growth which we have. I mean, one thing which I forgot actually in terms of statistics, with all this massive growth which I referred to in the case of Africa, for example, we have not even reached that 10%. I'm sure many of you are higher education students. It is a through taxonomy that we are still what is called in an elite system. With all this massification, we are still in an elite system in much of Africa, and I think parts of Asia as well. So that means that we are yet to expand higher education to reach where the north happens to be. The north is 50% and above. And we know very well that knowledge is critical for development. That means we have to continue to support higher education. So that is the situation we find ourselves, that it is continue to be a massive growth, a declining government revenue, a push from public to a private cost-sharing regime. That is where we currently find ourselves. And that is the challenge we find ourselves. And COVID doesn't seem to help. And the current conflicts elsewhere doesn't seem to help either. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tefera. I think that it has been really a wonderful, I would say, almost a lecture, on the context of financing higher education. I think that you put a lot of emphasis on the massive, explosion of the demand of higher education worldwide, and particularly in developing countries. The most important message that I heard from you is that public funding cannot really accommodate in terms of growth, in a commensurate manner the demands that now are coming from populations that still live in elite systems where less than 10% of a given cohort can really have access to higher education. You also mentioned, not only as a challenge, the lots of pressures from different sources that governments are getting to make sure that their agendas, for instance, you mentioned primary and secondary education, but also the results of the COVID. And you left just a thought about the growing trend towards cost sharing as a possible solution. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now it is my pleasure to turn to to our colleague at the World Bank, Dr. Bassett. Now you probably have or can help us having a different perspective, because you work in an institution that is critical to the development, among other things, the development of higher education systems, particularly in developing countries. Mm-hmm. So it would be good also to understand what is your perspective regarding the challenges that those countries are facing. And you have really, I mean, Professor Teferra as well, but you have really your hands-on projects that are being run here and there. So it would be really interesting to know your perspective.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very difficult to follow Damta, who did the tour of the academic field of financing higher education. But I will do my best because for our clients, the World Bank clients where we work, this is a key consideration that's coming up repeatedly. For a long time, it wasn't. It's something that countries could comfortably manage and manage based on historical norms. There has not been, in many of the client contexts where I work, purposeful planning on financing. It's just every year there's a 2% growth in what they do. Salaries go up by the same. Everything kind of is very static and formulaic. But as our panel colleagues have noted, that's just not possible anymore because of these expanded pressures, not just from expanded enrollments, which you all have seen, but also the demands to do more research, to be of more value to society in terms of outcomes and outputs and all of these additional requirements that are being placed on universities. You all know this as well as anybody, and that is very expensive. So in order to do this, they've had to look at different forms of funding models, and that's sort of where the bank comes in. We come in and support, looking at the funding model that they have and what their funding philosophy is, which I think is maybe the most intriguing part of what you were presenting, this idea of the feminization of the institution and being more interpersonal in the financing, right? And I think that's something that I bring as well to when I think that's one of the benefits of having more women involved in these conversations. We add another perspective, which is different from what was there historically, different from maybe those who are around the table, especially in countries where there are not as many women involved in the policy making, right? So it's wonderful. I mean, it resonated so strongly with me. But what we do is then say, okay, these are your national priorities. This is the philosophy that you're trying to achieve through your funding. What kind of models can be adapted to achieve those goals? Very goal-oriented, very strategically oriented financing. This is a philosophical transformation for many countries because the static nature is so much easier to implement day on, and you don't get fights. And many of you may know this. I mean, financing model changes leads to political protests. It leads to students in the streets. You see crises, and I can tell you from the World Bank's perspective, we don't want to be that organization that stimulated a political revolution. This is not, this is not the World Bank's role in the world. So we're very sensitive to those issues because we are wanting to serve our clients really well, and that's a challenge, but it is a real one. I worked in a country in Eastern Europe where they were going to eliminate student vouchers for room and board because it was a country that just couldn't afford it anymore. And that idea lasted, I think, a week, and then the vouchers stayed because you don't eliminate student vouchers, right? I mean, students are very powerful. But it does require a real awareness of those pressures, the societal pressures, the political pressures, the institutional pressures, while making transformative changes to the financing model. It's very, very difficult. I also think institutions actually don't know well what it actually costs to deliver what they deliver, right? They know what they charge to deliver what they deliver. They know what they have historically paid for what they deliver, but there's not a use of great data to know, like a class of this size should cost this much based on infrastructure, all of those things, the costs that go, overhead costs, direct costs, et cetera. So there's, again, this sort of historical norming of what you should pay, what the state should pay, what the institutions pay. But when we have run studies in countries that said, just analyze your economics department or your engineering department and look at per student cost. And it's completely different almost every time from what they think it costs. Again, the use of data, so I guess this is what I would stress. Financing efficiently and effectively requires good data. And many of the countries where we work don't have good data for absolutely reasonable reasons, but reasons that impact their ability to have efficient and strategic financing of their sectors. And so if we can be helpful in that realm, that's where the bank comes in as well. I think also, and I've spoken about this before, the idea of diversification of the systems, that we're not just financing the most expensive model of tertiary education, that students can benefit from teacher-driven education in many contexts and in many fields so that it doesn't require a research-intensive university to provide effective teaching that leads to outcomes that students value and that society values, and that those types of innovations mission and institutional type and modes of delivery can allow the financing to spread out more, affect more students more positively. And that's a challenge for countries to really figure out if they can do that, if they have the structures to do it, and then how to do it. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have to say, I feel relieved now when I realize that the World Bank is not promoting revolution. No, sorry.
Not on a stage, anyway.
No, but it was very clear as well, Dr. Besset. I think that this idea of having a goal-oriented perspective on funding and helping countries, to develop their capacities, starting by simply by something that sounds really, I would say, a priority, which is the availability of data, as to get to know how much the service you are providing costs. I think that's really very, very interesting. I think that I couldn't agree more with you when it comes to the real need of knowing how much higher education really costs. And I think that also implicitly you reminded us of something that the two previous panelists already said, the enormous pressures that the systems are facing, either demographic or social and political, as we have seen already. Okay, good. Now, I think that we have a first round which sets the scene. Now, let's go for finding or sharing some possible avenues for solution. Subsecretaria.
Subsecretariat, I'd like to give you the opportunity. I know that we say this is an assault on you to ask you questions when you've hardly had time to even start talking. But anyway, I would think it'd be very interesting for the audience here today to have your view on your plans in terms of what solutions, innovative solutions, what are you trying to do to bring into play in Chile to deal with these challenges which you yourself have referred to? Well, thank you very much. Very interesting to see how financing of tertiary education is a real challenge. But in view of these social and political contexts we've mentioned, it's pretty clear that we need to ask ourselves new questions about financing. There's something which, at least in Chile, which we have seen, is that there's no a single one-size-fits-all. More than anything, we need to design things. We need to build things. We need to tailor-made them, thinking about what our priorities are. Now, we have needs which are expressed in tertiary education. We always find growing tension with the way things are financed. Finally, the economy ministers are very powerful people, and they decide where money goes and how it's invested. And so very often we've joked that they don't have a heart. They are heartless, tiny, or heart of stone. This cannot be financed, they say. Nonetheless, if you think about it, in Chile, we invest something like 1.4% of its GDP in tertiary education. And therefore, we could think that we are doing something badly. And this is perhaps, we need to give some sense to our way we finance. But it should not only be the state which needs to finance, but how can we get a political project, lead it from the government itself, using or at least what the plans we have in our government, how are we going to put in place this design in order to bring on board other actors who can also make contributions, but they need to be given a design. And this is perhaps what the most complex situation inside. How do we place the incentives where those incentives need to be? And how do we design a project for tertiary education where what moves us is how can we contribute to generating a society which really, really represents where we have all knowledge, where we have all points of view and positions in order to be able to participate in the decision-making process. Doubtless, universities are still spaces of social mobility, even though there's a massification or mobility of talents. In the case of Chile, these are not necessarily the poorest sectors, or indigenous peoples, or women, or sexual diversity, or migrants. These are not the people, or people with handicaps. These are people who are having access to these spaces. And since they can't have access to these spaces, and since they need to look for alternatives of a lower quality perhaps, they don't have the possibility of social mobility. We're thinking in Chile about a financing system which looks at different aspects of this issue. First of all, we need to look at how to strengthen access, provide people with a greater access to university education. We need to increase that access. And how? What can we do so that people, depending on their capacities, how can all people have access? We bring about a series of university entrance exams, for example, in Chile, which should not include a higher financial cost. But we want to bring on board more people. We need to look at the context in which people really reach higher education. And then how do we finance? How do we place all this? How do we provide resources for tertiary education so that they can provide training, which not only responds to certain standards, but also are spaces where with diversity and where we generate new proposals for future development. We cannot have tertiary education which is not aimed at sustainable development, human rights, targeted at feminist stances, which we understand in our government. These are new proposals of rethinking society and rethinking the structures of power in society. And if we are not there at the beginning of these decision-making processes, we'll not be able to influence them. I'm talking here about women and other groups. So we need to have these experiences. We need to be in certain places in order to be influenced. We have been excluded from certain spaces. And today we have the opportunity. In my case, as a Sub-Secretary of Higher Education, we can put these thoughts to use in tertiary education. And we believe that this is a contribution. It's affirmative action. We need to rethink how we guide or rechannel financing. Are we going to condone debts? Are women the people who are most indebted? Are women those who have access to most precarious jobs? Women take care of people and they're not paid for it. We have an economic and financial narrative. If we don't bring this to the forefront, the thing is that the financial system, which we want to design, will simply replicate and commit the same errors we made before. And so therefore, we understand that from the feminist standpoint, the patriarchal system has designed a certain system, and what we need to change is this. And we need to find some way of finding a formula for refinancing. We are thinking and asking ourselves questions, which are key questions in order to rethink from a feminist standpoint concerning financing. We understand that the definition of this system of financing needs to be created together with different partners, with universities, also with private universities, of course, let's not forget them, with different parts of the country. We cannot design a financing system which does not take on board all these sectors of the territory, universities, intercultural contributions to universities which are in specific economic, in those areas which are most affected by climate change. And this is also very important. We begin with lack of water, for example. We knew there was going to be a problem for the next few decades. So it may well be that financing for higher education is a way to generate changes. It's a way to break through molds, to break different structures, not only think about reducing breaches, but we have the recipe or not. We need to talk about the recipe. We need to put it together. We need to rethink it. But we do have the main thing. And this was absolutely a good starting point. Thank you very much, Subsecretary. I believe that it's been made very clear to all of us. First of all, if you'll allow me, I'd like to highlight a couple of points. How you've talked about not one size fits all. That was the expression I used, I believe, at least in the Spanish version of it. So then I also believe that we should also highlight the role which the state may play as looking for different ways to finance things, and particularly to use incentives in a strategic way. We've given us a couple of examples about financing of institutions and how, via financing, you can incentivate a commitment for certain values, which may be crucial within the context of your project. And finally, the final highlight is that you've recognized quite honestly that you are still need to find the right formulas to be used, but it's been made very clear to me that financing is a very important method to change things. Thank you very much indeed again for your talk.
Now, I'd like very much, and please don't feel the need to be confined to sub-Saharan Africa, go as you please, but I think it would be very interesting to see from your own research and experience if there are any innovative avenues for financing higher education. I mean, how do you think that countries, particularly, you said in the global south, so to say, should go about accommodating those pressures and demands in the context of very limited financial capacity?
Thank you. I like what you said earlier. One size fits doesn't apply. Not at the global level, not even at the country level, in terms of, you just want to pick up where you left off, Roberta, in terms of differentiating in universities or institutions in general at the national level is critical, because it responds to different needs and different backgrounds and also different outcomes. The problem we have in much of the world, I can say that, everyone wants to be Harvard when they are not, and when they shouldn't and couldn't. That's the challenge we have in much of the world, that institutions seem to have same mission and same vision. They try to replicate somebody else's mission statements and vision statements. Actually, we did a study a while back to look at specifically what the vision statements were. So they all respond to that. I want to be the top 10 in Asia or Africa, whatever it was. So that tendency of isomorphism to mean that, to replicate what somebody else is doing tends to be one of the critical issues we have. And the response to that is to make sure that a differentiated higher education system exists in a nation. But it's a very political one. So how would you say one institution that you are now a research university, and the other one would be a comprehensive university, and the other one you are simply a teaching institution? That's a very political one. But I'm not sure whether that would raise a revolution, but that's one. The other one is in terms of centrally locating higher education in the development trajectory. That, 20 years ago, higher education relegated somewhere else. Now, increasingly, in the last 2 decades, it has now become centrally located in the global, national, development trajectories. From OECD, the World Bank, African Development Bank, all agree that higher education is critical. So that movement needs to continue. Even to some of those heartless finance ministers, this kind of heavy pressure and discourse would help you push that agenda forward. The other one, which is also very important in respect to what some of the issues I raised earlier, that this public-private partnership need to be nurtured and need to be advanced for this massive an increasingly growing student population to be accommodated in the higher education sector. I'll be very short with some of because I have a couple of them. And this would be a very political one as well. How are you going to impose taxes and also graduate taxes to actually be able to support some of them? In much of Africa, I can say, Asia to a certain extent, we have multinational corporations and corporations nationally based. So if in the case of, for example, Ghana and Nigeria, they have established what is called a trust fund, which directly goes into higher education. In fact, if you go to Accra or Nigeria, you buy a cup of coffee or tea, then there is a 2% VAT that goes straight into a trust fund. And that is one avenue of trying to address some of these issues, in addition to this public-private partnership. Of course, maybe this is probably something which you do not talk about it, to be able to enhance the internal efficiencies of universities themselves. You see in some of resource tied institutions to actually own very expensive equipments and infrastructure lying around, and there is no opportunities or practice of sharing those resources. And we see that a lot. And I don't want to go into the details, but just simply highlight the importance of that. And the other thing, there was a presentation yesterday, some of us contested the title, which said international aid. What's the name she presented, and some of us contested. So we will call it International Development Partnership, okay? So that's very important for some of us, because this power dynamics in this aid still continues to linger, and some of us don't subscribe to that. I just have to state that. But going back, in terms, some of the arguments that made yesterday was to actually elevate that development cooperation to higher education. But let me remind this audience that if I gave you the figure, sometimes you wonder what's the point of this development partnership with regard to higher education. It is 0.03%. My good colleague, Professor Varghese, actually got that information and sent me when I was documenting. But let me just say this, however. Even though this looks marginal, it's, however, surgical, I call it. What do I mean by that? All those resources that come, most of those resources that come from development cooperation actually goes into research, which is key. What does that mean? It has lots of implication in terms of research that happens in the South. I'm not going to go into those details. But I will leave it at that. I have several other points. I hope I'll get a chance to reflect.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this passionate, I would say, contribution. Let me just review quickly some of the ideas that you shared with us. I think that one very important idea is that, in your view, higher education is increasingly centrally located in the development plans, and I think that that's quite good. You also mentioned in terms of possibilities for finding solution to these challenges, paying more attention to public-private partnerships, paving the way for new forms of cooperation. Also, a strategic use of taxes, and particularly in view of trust funds. I think that you provided us with a couple of examples on that. And the third point was about the ways by which we can really improve the internal efficiency of institutions, which is also, I think it's very much connected to what Dr. Bassett said about the need to have more data about the costs of what institutions do. I take your point about international aid, but I wonder, I'm sorry, this is just a reaction, I'm using my privilege as a moderator, whether a change in the title wouldn't be in fact an euphemism in the end, okay, because it doesn't change the content. Anyway, we
We'll debate that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Dr. Basset, the floor is yours now to provide us with, you work in a way in a lighthouse when it comes to that. So you probably have seen innovative solutions, promising avenues. Please do share them with us.
Thanks very much, yeah. One of the key issues I'd like to stress is that it's important that universities are seen as a partner in this change that happens around university financing and higher education financing. The dialogue has often been the government is going to impose something and the universities are going to fight something. And this is just super problematic because in the entire ecosystem, in the execution of higher education, it is a partnership. It's a constantly reinforced partnership. And universities are full of the economists and the instructors and the smartest people you're going to find in society. They can be charged with actually understanding their financing more. They can be given more space to be a problem solver in this. I mean, everybody knows that financing, even as it's grown, and it has in almost every country, what they're spending on higher education is more, but per student it is less because of massification, because of expanding needs, right? So they are pushing their budgets as hard as they can in many of our client countries, maybe most of them, to be good partners in the financing of higher education. And institutions I know would step up when asked to be good partners in that dialogue. What often happens is very adversarial. So I would think this is the first sort of order change, would be to change that relationship with the system, and then ask them too to look at the system holistically as well, not just in their institutions, but how they relate to each other, how they relate to the students, and what that does impacting cost and financing. So I think that's a really big issue. I think from where I sit, because I kind of sit, and the World Bank sits in this space where we negotiate between educators and governments and try to create shared language and a shared vision for how these things could work, and then invest in that change. There's always an economic argument to be made, right? And we will always provide that economic argument if we believe very strongly that the change is necessary. One of those arguments is the return on investments argument, which for decades plagued the World Bank because it was interpreted in certain ways, but in the last 10 years we've seen the return on investment in higher education is the highest of all levels of the education pipeline, especially in low-income countries. That's quite powerful when we bring that to a minister of finance especially and say, you've neglected this sector for a while. You may blame the bank for that. It wasn't me. I wasn't even born yet probably when that happened, but I will take that hit, and then I will encourage you to look at the return on investment you get for every dollar you spend, every peso you spend on that student that you're bringing to the institution. It's valuable to your society, and it's valuable to that individual. The whole of your system, your whole of your nation benefits from this. That's the powerful argument you bring to a Ministry of Finance. And so, again, it's data. It's being able to do the data. It's being able to have an economist or many in your country that's constantly looking at that, because it's really important to have evidence, right? The finance ministers everywhere in the world make their decisions based on evidence. And so the evidence is necessary. All of you are very smart people. Institutions are full of very smart people. Bring the evidence. And then we can defend it as well when we propose projects. And I think the last thing I say, and it hasn't come up yet, is technology. Technology is going to change the way we deliver higher education. It's also, in the short term, probably going to be an equity challenge. As many of you may know, it's the poorest tend not to have access to the technology that is going to be the change agent. But that will come, and when that does come, technology will help assist in the delivery of higher education at a lower cost in time. That's not the truth today. We know this. Technology is more expensive today. But with a consistent investment in technology for the delivery and also for the monitoring and evaluation of the quality of delivery and the cost of delivery, technology will help provide the evidence and also provide the access. And that's going to be a huge financing change. But that requires, again, investments in infrastructure, investments in electricity, investments in all the things that rural areas don't have, and often investments in improving all the institutions, not just higher education institutions, so that, if women are in a rural community, they can take higher education courses at the local school, but that local school is tied to a hub university in a major city. that's really important. It's going to change completely how many people get to access higher education, but that school needs the technology and the infrastructure, right? So again, it's holistic investments, understanding what it takes to deliver higher education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Three powerful messages I'm getting. One is about the promises that may come with technology, and certainly they are going to shape differently the provision of higher education. At the beginning, you said something that I think it's crucial, is that higher education institutions should be seen as partners in all these discussions. And finally, the relevance of bringing the economic argument up front when you are discussing with the Ministry of Finance, particularly when it comes to the return on investment, which, as you said, is a powerful source of evidence. Thank you very much. Now, if you don't mind, we are going to open the floor for participants. No, sorry. Yes, please, if you can, exactly. I see one,
That's
then
terrifying.
two, three, four,
You can ignore
5.
to respond.
We will take 5, okay? And then we'll see if time allows us to go further, okay? The first is the lady here. Yes, you. You can speak in English, Spanish. You don't need to ask questions. You can simply share your thoughts.
La voy a hacer en español para la subsecretaria de Educación.
Hello, I'm Marta Silva. I'm Colombian, and I would like to know how, from my viewpoint, from the Chilean government's vantage point, what are we going to do to ensure that the necessary support can be provided to all the sectors who you're talking about in education when the role of the private university has been preponderant. The public universities don't have either the capacity even today or the institutionalization to be able to quickly adapt to this change. So it would be very important to understand, firstly, how we can sort of move over from the private to the public university quickly in terms of institutionalizing presence, and how all these sectors who we wish to fund, how is it going to be possible to do so purely with public education? Private universities, could they not have a role within that to give a scenario which is more equitable?
I will give you the floor in case you wanted to react. Okay. And next, I think that there was someone, yes, the gentleman, and then we'll move to the other side. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Vladimir Pokhrov.
I'm afraid the speakers cannot hear the microphone.
Okay, let's do the following.
Whenever these studies coming showing the high costs of education, just to justify that the public investment is not enough, we never come to think about higher education investment and not cost. I think you should persuade in a case study where all the investment done in higher education by nations, by governments, how much this nation, this society earns. How much do we profit with that? The society, not the bank. Okay? So, because this is something that we have very nice examples for that. You can get, for instance, South Korea would be a nice example of how high education investment turns one very poor country into a highly industrialized place. So this is something to think about before we say that the governments don't have the capacity of investment. And to the lady of the bank, If I understood well, you said that your clients, they know how much they charge, they know how much they earn, but they don't know how much it costs. But you yourself, or I think yourself said that investing in private education, higher education, is a very profitable, one of the most profitable investments you have in the bank. So where comes this profit from? I mean, if you have profit, someone is paying for the profit. Probably the students and their families, because they increase their debts, because of probably the governments, because they deprive from other investments. So think about it. I mean, is it fair to talk about profit when you are talking about education? I came to a seminar this morning, where education is recognized as a right for the individuals, not a profitable for clients. Thank you.
Thank you. You forgot to introduce yourself, by the way.
Excuse me. My name is Rui Opperman. I'm here for the space of Latin American, Caribbean space of higher education.
Oh.
Actually, I'm Brazilian.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we will try, I'm keeping you in mind, but we will try here. We will try just with the
Thank
gentleman. Okay. Do you mind
My name is
introducing
Vladimir
yourself?
Bakhrushin. I represent the Zaporizhia Polytechnic National University from Ukraine. And first of all, I want to thank all speakers for interesting discussion, and especially thanks for World Bank for its constant strong support of Ukrainian reforms in higher education since the last few years. And especially the reforming of funding in higher education. And support now when we have Russian invasion, and supporting of World Bank is very important for us. And my short question is, what funding system is a good funding system? And the second, what are the criteria of efficiency of this funding system? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go back to the gentleman there. And then,
Aló.
yes.
Hola, Simón Boric de Chile.
I'm Simón Boric from the University of Chile. I have a question for my question from Colombia. I think that public universities can change systems. They have been limited in terms of registration and fees. We don't have a mixed model, but a private system, a neoliberal model, which was implanted in the directory, can be reversed. The region of Valparaiso, the Catholic universities and private universities receive more funding than the two public universities in the region. So there has been a certain abandonment. And my question for the Sub-Secretary is, I'd like to know your opinion. What is the main feature of a private university over a public one? I think that private universities can generate public good, but I would like to know your opinion, also the other panelists there on. There's a microphone further behind, I think.
Sí. Yes, for you. Yeah. My colleague from UIS.
Yeah,
That's the
thank you very much.
privilege of.
This is very passionate and very interesting discussion. I would just want to stress the importance of having data, because data are very important at all levels of the system. Data are important to understand the background of student, the background of those who do not have the chance to participate in higher education, and data are also important to develop schemes on how much is needed to be invested in education, and who should pay for what, and this is lacking. And you know, especially in the context of developing countries, you need data also, fiscal data, to be able to assess who is in need of support, and as long as these data are not there, then you are navigating blind, and you know, government do not have the tools to really develop the system. And I would just lastly talk about decentralization. of higher education. In many developing countries, usually the higher education institutions are located in big cities, leaving the other area of the country, not covered. And this have also impact on cost, because, for those who are from rural area, for them students to go to the big cities and pay for, housing and everything, this is very expensive, and we could be a barrier against, participation to education. And also for a higher education institution to integrate local and regional, realities, it's very important for them not to be located only in big cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I cannot take any more. I understand that the topic is really, but they are going to remain here, so you can try to find them and continue the conversation, because I'm getting a message we should leave the room soon for the next panel to come in. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'm going to give you as much time as needed, if possible less than 1 minute, if I can ask. But just to react, I mean, don't feel obliged, just responda si le parece a los comentarios, do as you.
Please answer the comment. Thank you very much for the questions, because that's the whole point of it, to reflect, to think how funding is a means. It's not an end in itself. When we look at figures and magnitudes, we lose sight of why we want to fund, or what we want to fund at the end of the day. Because the government has been very clear in pointing out that within our program, there are a few strategic axes. First of all, how can we recover the pride and place of public education? With a series of standards, but state education, which via its universities represent the diversity we wish to promote. Private universities do not have that diversity. We have a system where there are some very elite private universities. There are 1,000-meter, if you like, universities, which represent those who come from private education, secondary education, and only the elite. And what is the level of reflection on the public good and the public structures in that kind of university? In Chile, we are discussing the right to choose and abortion, and there are religious universities who say, we have, it's like religious objection. And we have a clear roadmap which to strengthen public education, which to generate systems of access which are equitable and democratic, which to promote and strengthen technical and vocational training as a route towards the labour market, and to take a long, hard look at funding. How can we, if you like, ensure that there are political decisions looking at the trajectory, at access, how to break down inequality, and define what is the best alternative funding? That doesn't mean to put a stop to private universities. No way. They could form part of the project via the accreditation systems, and private universities we should encourage them to provide grants and scholarships for certain sectors, or to promote certain areas of thought or reflection, or contemplate particular subjects we may have interest. We do not wish to do away with private universities, but the state should have responsibility and decision-making powers over its public institutions. It has institutions, but they've had to compete in conditions that are not those of a level playing field. It's a very unequal struggle via what has been said. What is the main feature of a public education? One which reflects what is discussed in the public fora, which is accessible to all, and which is a mechanism to change life systems. I do not like to be self-referential, but if it hadn't been for a public education which allowed to take a due account of me and my background, and now to me as a Mapuche woman from a poor background, I would not have been able to be here talking to you with an academic trajectory, and a university should be able to meet that. So today, more than ever, public education is an opportunity, a golden opportunity that countries have to generate change. We are looking from it from a feminist, plurinational perspective in a process of dialogue with all necessary stakeholders. Will we achieve it in 4 years? Probably not, maybe not. But we'd certainly like to step the building blocks, right, towards a more equitable higher education. Thank you.
Creo que en nuestros aplausos se encuentra una expresión de...
Well, I think there's a solidarity in the applause from groups of the meeting. Professor Tefara.
And reactions, maybe.
Thank you. I think that clapping is for us all, I guess.
Yes. No, you'll have your share later on.
On a serious note, I think Professor Ru, good to see you. I think, just to throw some statistics, you actually picked South Korea has the highest GDP investment, even higher than Japan itself. So they know where, they put their, what is it in English called? They put their money where their mouth is. And you see what they're producing. So, yes, I agree with you, higher education is not an expenditure. It is an investment. That investment, in fact, that was an issue 20 years ago, and I don't want to go into the details of rate of return and the consequences of that rate of return, which we have now dropped, and everyone is advancing higher education. Yes, it's an investment, and it should continue to be supported. The next one, to my Ukrainian person there, what is a good funding system? For me, a good funding system is a system which looks at access while it is also looking at equity issues at the same time. Not just simply numbers, but also addresses all the issues we talked about, the marginal in terms of communities, the gender, the disability, and all that. That is, for me, an excellent funding system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tefera. Dr. Basset.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to apologize if I was confusing in what I had said about the rate of return and the bank's work. The bank invests in higher education as a partner to the countries where we work. Nobody's profiting on these investments. These investments are loans that the countries take out, usually at 0 interest or very low interest, that get repaid over 30 years. And in the time that they're investing in these projects, it is entirely to improve the higher education sector. So the World Bank is not a profit-making bank. The World Bank is a representative organization with donor countries that put money in that we put out into the countries where we support our projects. So if that was confusing, I apologize. What we do when we try to convince, and by me, we is me, when I sit with the Minister of Finance, I can defend an investment in higher education because of this rate of return information that we have now. That an individual, even where we're not investing, so it's not about where the World Bank's investing, it's about any country that's investing in higher education. If they monitor the progress of their students through tracer studies or labor market observatories or wherever the data is coming from, again, data is really important. You can prove that the graduates of your higher education system are contributing to your society in a profoundly important way that makes that investment worthwhile. And we're entering that point of the year where the newspapers are going to start chiming out whether higher education is worth it, it's very expensive, and do they get jobs, and all of these things. Somebody has to be able to defend the sector and say it is worth it. It's worth it to the individual, it's worth it to society, it's worth it to your country. In any way that you value in a strategic way, higher education can be a partner to making those changes happen for you and to being a robust element of a functioning society. And so this is what we use our investments for. There is no profit being made on World Bank projects. That's not how we operate. And then I would say for your question on what is a good higher education funding model, it's one that allows institutions to achieve their mission, whatever that mission is. So if the institution's mission is to support low-income communities as a community college, that the funding is sufficient to do that at a very high quality. And whether it's a research university or a local institution that's training teachers, if it can achieve that mission with stability and security and effectiveness, then that's a good funding model. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that I have had the impression that we touch upon some important questions, but at the same time, that the time pressure, as many other pressures we have seen this afternoon, I mean, does not allow us simply to go in depth with many of the issues. I think that if we had enough time, we would see conflicts arising among us. Unfortunately, okay, great then, great. Look, participants, thank you very much for your participation. I'd like very much to repeat what I said at the beginning. There is a background paper to this discussion. Please feel free to download it, to put your comments on it. UNESCO is committed to continue working in the area of financing of higher education. And that said, I would like very much now for the three of them to get your applause. Thank you.